Chapter 12. Rosa. They're a strange bird. Nobody sees them come, and nobody sees them go. Billy Harbison. Now he's laid around long enough, his mother said. He's crowding 8 years old, and this fall he's going to school. Chauncey looked at her in dismay. He knew that ropey look around her mouth. Even without seeing it, he could tell she meant business by her voice. She'd put up with a thing a long time. She mightn't like it much, but hardly a word would she say against it. She'd go along with it so far, then she'd stop, and crowbars couldn't move her. This was at the dinner table. His father looked up dryly. I'm not exactly averse to education. I've been teaching him at home what I could, but school is an apple off another tree. How do you propose to get him back and forward? He can walk like the other young ones. Chauncey looked anxiously around the table. How could he do that, when hardly could he go out to the barn without his heart acting like it did? It wouldn't be so bad if school still kept in the small log house that used to stand yonder across the run. His father had been master then, they said, but now the academy stood uptown, a big one-story brick building, heated by its floor. A low kiln stood at one end. It burned logs, and the fire and smoke went through flues in the floor. That brick floor, they said, kept your feet warm as a toddy. If they were wet, it dried them, but only boys' feet. Girls had to go to Miss Porter's or Miss Bly's school. Unfortunately, our boy is not like other children, Porteous mentioned gravely. That's all he's heard since he's old enough to tell one word from another, his mother said. He has legs like the rest of us. Old Lady Winters told me many a time she'd give up and died long ago if she couldn't get out every day for a tramp, and she's 84. Even at 80, she probably has a good heart. Chauncey might have a good heart at 8 years old, too. Sayward said grimly, You always claim a body's innocent till he's proved guilty. Anyway, I'm taking him to the new doctor this afternoon. Chauncey looked in alarm at his father. He's a quack, Sayward, Porteous declared. He boasted to me himself that he was a stable boy in Kentucky. A horse kicked him, and they took him to a doctor. He told me he thought that if doctors could be so stupid, egotistical, and well paid, he would be one too. All the preparation he ever had was hanging up his shingle. That's what I like about him, Sayward said. He tells you what he isn't, and what he doesn't know. Well, I'm only sorry for the boy. Porteous rose from the table and retreated to his law room. The last glimpse Chauncey had of him, his face looked dark and grave, and the boy felt that darkness and gravity spread over him. His father had deserted him. He was left now to the ministrations of his mother and the quack. A verse he had heard in church kept going through his head as his sisters got him ready for the doctor. It was about a sheep that was dumb. Yeah, it opened not its mouth. That was plainly himself as his sisters scrubbed, dressed, and combed him for the doctor. He was like the lamb his mother had sold last week. to the butcher. That lamb didn't know what was ahead as they pulled it away, but he did. He couldn't bear to see it going to a place of knives and blood. He couldn't understand how his mother could be so cruel, but she said there were some cruel things in life you had to go through. She and Deesia drove him away in the chase. As they came to the doctor's house, they saw two-wheelers, four-wheelers, and saddled horses from the country tied outside. It was a big green house, but the windows were pale as sightless eyes. And as they walked from the chase to the front porch, something came out of that house at them. Chauncey couldn't see what it was, but as they stepped through the front door, he could smell strange and fearful compounds. He tried to turn back. Almost he believed now that he could run, but it was too late. Deesia was closing the door behind him, and his mother dragged him into a room where women in pained faces and men with solemnly bandaged heads and arms sat around in silent and dismal conclave. For hours, it seemed, they had to sit there, while the sores and sicknesses of those present and past, the crippled, the cankered, and the dying, hid in the dim corners, and hovered under the ceiling, a lifeless congregation of invisible vapors and soundless whispers, slowly turning and wheeling and pressing in upon his chest. Many of those who had once frequented this room, Chauncey felt, must now lie buried in the churchyard, but the intangible vestiges of their wretched sufferings still hung here behind the curtains, as their blood and ointments still stained the carpet and walls. None of the patients he saw go in the doctor's office came out again. Deesia said they went out another way, but fear paralyzed the boy. In time there were so few left in the waiting room that Deesia felt free enough to make him spell out the letters of the framed notice on the wall, and by this he knew that whatever happened to him, his fate was lawfully sealed, for this was the doctor's license, hung up for everyone to see, stating that he had the right to practice physic and surgery. There it was for all men to know by these presents that Zephyr Brown, president of the Court of Common Pleas of Shawnee County, by the authority vested in him, had made it true and according to law, and so had set his hand an official seal. Furthermore, the secretary of the 3rd Medical District had sworn that this was a true copy of the license, and had so signed it with his unintelligible hand. Whenever the doctor's door opened now, Chauncey's heart shook him. His hour approached. When it came, his mother had to drag him like she had the lamb from the barn. "Now who's this young gentleman?" a brusque, cheery voice demanded. "And what's he so pale and contrary about?" Chauncey looked up and saw a tall, ponderous man in a long black coat, with velvet lapels and collar. "It's his heart, doctor," Chauncey's mother said. "You're too young to be worried about your heart, young man," the doctor reproved him. He bent down and laid his head against the wildly agitated breast. It was a great head, with a shag of iron-gray hair that pressed up against the little boy's face. "Quiet, boy, quiet," the doctor said, as if talking to a horse. "There's nothing to frighten anybody in here." While he spoke, Chauncey had to breathe the choking medical scent of that hair, and through it he could see shelves lined with jars of poisonous-looking paste and liquid. A mortar and pestle stood on top of the cabinet, and on the table below were strewn evil-looking knives, scissors, and forceps, while in the midst stood a white basin half filled with blood, and now he could make out drops of blood scattered over the brown table and floor, while over in the corner crouched and grinned what once upon a time had walked the earth as a man or woman, but of which now nothing remained but its bones, like a bundle of dried roots of a blown-down willow tree. The doctor seemed unusually sober when he raised his head, as if it were tragic to have found what he had in one so young. He went on methodically to examine tongue, ribs, and other more private parts. When he finished, he took down a jar from the cabinet and poured out a few many-colored pills in the boy's trembling hand. "They're only sugar balls, my boy. Try one. They won't hurt you. Also, they won't cure you." "How is he, doctor?" Sayward asked. The doctor seated himself, as though figuring out what to say. He looked extremely sad and resigned. "Did you see Miss Crane and old Mr. Oliver in the waiting room? They come to me, the aged and the palsied, the weary and the worn out. If we knew what was waiting for us farther on in life, Miss Wheeler, the woe and death of all our hopes, the wormwood of the approaching grave, I wonder would we waste our lives in vain regret for one who must die so young?" Chauncey felt his heart turn over like a startled squirrel in a cage, while behind him something dark and silent and very terrible made ready to spring at him. He thought Deesia saw it too, for her face was faintly paler. Only their mother stood there as if she hadn't heard. "What can you do for him, doctor?" she asked. "I'm sorry, Miss Wheeler," he said, "but I can't cure your boy." Chauncey saw that familiar bitter look come on his mother's face, but not a word of complaint did she make. "No, I can't cure him," the doctor went on, "but nature can. Nature made us what we are, in the first place, but we must give nature a chance. Don't tie up this colt in the stable. Put him out to pasture and let him run." "He isn't tied up, doctor," she said, "but it seems he can't run." The doctor nodded, leaned back, and put his thumbs under his vest. Now, who did he remind him of? Chauncey wondered. Then he remembered what his father had said. The stable boy. The doctor's hands, he remembered, had run over him, gentle as over a colt's legs. "I want to tell you something, Miss Wheeler," he said. "You and I, and all creatures in captivity, are lazy. Where we get it, I don't know. Certainly not from the devil. But I know why we get it. Because we shut ourselves up from nature. Let me tell you a case I had of a storekeeper who came to me sick and ailing. I told him to walk. He got mad as a wet hen. That's what was the matter with him, he said. He was worn out walking up and down behind the counters of his store. But that's not the same thing. I told him, go to nature. Walk the streets and the country. That's my prescription. He followed it, and it cured him. Now let me tell you another. When I was a stableman, I had a mare that was balky. She got lame as soon as you started out with harness on her, but I noticed she didn't limp in pasture, and she didn't limp when I put her oats and hay where she had to walk across the stable yard to get them. After a while, I had her walking down the alley to another stable where I'd feed her. In the end, I used to drive her out in the country to feed her, and she'd run without limping all the way home. I had her hardened up and cured in no time. You do the same, that'll be 50 cents. Chauncey looked at his mother, and then at the doctor, with bewilderment. What did the stories about the storekeeper and horse have to do with his sick heart? He stumbled out with his mother when she left. Oh, the air outside would have been sweet as locust blossoms if she hadn't said that he couldn't get up in the chase. Now that I'm this far, I think I'll drive up and see Effie and the baby, she told them. It isn't a good place for you to be, so you'll have to walk home. Walk, Mama, Chauncey stammered. When you're tired, you can rest, his mother said firmly. When you get home, you can lay down. It isn't far. You can almost see it from here. Chauncey felt so wounded. He turned his head so he wouldn't see her drive away. She didn't have to go up and see Effie. No, he understood now. She just went up there so he would have to walk home. She and the doctor and Little Turtle, they were all cracked on walking. They didn't care what happened to his heart. Neither did Deesia. Oh, Libby and Huldah and Sooth would holler at him, but they had soft hearts underneath. They would carry him a piece if he got tired. But not Deesia. She wouldn't tease him or jeer, and neither would she do anything for him she wasn't supposed to. She was a little old Yankee. She'd preach at you how good you had to be, but she never had any mercy. If you owed her anything, you had to pay on the dot. Now let's go, she told him primly. We'll walk down Water Street, and you can look at the river. Lift your feet, and don't go so slow. Chauncey knew before he started that he wouldn't make it farther than the nail mill. Aunt Jenny used to live near there before she moved to the boat yard. When they got there, Deesia didn't want to stop, but Chauncey sat down on the curb of the wooden pump that stood on the street. He wanted to lie down, but Deesia wouldn't let him. Now don't look over at those awful tenches, she told him. Before he knew it, she said it was time to start again. He made like he didn't hear her. She tried to pull him up to his feet, but he fought her and shrieked so dreadfully she let go. You'll be sorry, she warned. I was just going to take you as far as the fulling mill. You can rest there and see the dye come out in the tail race. But if you won't come, I'm going straight home. Are you coming? I mean it. She did mean it, too, Chauncey knew. He heard her start away. She looked back once, and her cool eyes appraised him. She must have seen he didn't intend to come, for she went on this time and didn't look around. He felt a sudden fear to see her go. She walked so fast, but he closed his mouth tightly so he wouldn't call. Hardly was she past the fulling mill when two boys came out of a yard across the way. One he knew was Turkey Tench. He was about as big as Chauncey, the other a good deal smaller. As they came close, they had that peculiar acid odor he noticed on some boys. Massey said it was because they never washed themselves all over or changed their clothing. They stood now and eyed him hard, like enemies. What's the matter? You can't walk, Turkey jeered. My heart jumps. Where does it jump to? No place, just up and down. I don't see it jump. You can't see it, but you can hear it if you put your head on my chest. That's the way my doctor does. Right on here. Turkey stood there skeptically. He would never do such a sissy, intimate thing as lay his head on Chauncey's chest. but he was willing to put his grimy hand on it. "What makes it jump?" he asked, subdued. The doctor said he couldn't do anything for it. "I want to feel it," the little tench cried. He felt, but drew his hand away quickly, leaving another black smudge on Chauncey's white blouse. "Can Rosa feel it?" Turkey asked. "I don't care," Chauncey said. "Rosa!" the little tench yelled. Suddenly Chauncey felt he was their confederate and friend. They took his arms and helped him gingerly movements toward the yard. Almost at once Chauncey felt stronger. This was better than going home with Deesia. The fence was of slabs, and he couldn't see through till they came in the gate. Then he felt full of wonder, for the yard was like no yard he had ever seen before. Back home everything had to be put away neatly. A place for everything, and everything in its place, his mother used to say. In this yard things were thrown anywhere. The whole yard lay choked with useless traps and belongings. Here were used kegs and barrels, a heap of trimmed stone, a hogshead with the head knocked out, nests of wet excelsior, a pile of boat lumber, a broken kettle, a rowboat with a stoved-in side, some rusty iron, a bottomless cedar tub, some long oars with split and smashed blades, a sawbuck and wooden horses, a mossy draw bucket from some well, a bench with a leg split off, and 1,000 things more, all worn out or worthless, jumbled helter-skelter, thrown together or strewn apart, most of them dark and damp from the weather. Chauncey stood over an old boat pole, drinking in it all. It was like he had entered a different world, a new life, a place where he didn't have to take care, where nobody would make him wash his hands or pick up his traps and put them away. He felt curiously blessed and lightened. They went on to the porch, a narrow shelf of plank with a dipping roof. The floor was tracked with dried mud and piled at one end with empty bottles, jugs, jars, earthenware, cooking pots, plant boxes, and other trash. Rosa Turkey yelled. The door to the house stood open, and amid the dim disorder inside, Chauncey glimpsed a girl. She didn't seem any older than he or Turkey. Her face looked white and delicately perfect in this untidy and disorderly place. She came out, slow and calm, in a torn dress that showed one slender leg almost to her thigh. A grimy child clung to one hand, but the girl herself looked miraculously clean and spotless, as if no dirt could soil her. "Rosa, you want to hear his heart jump," Turkey said, and now he boldly put his wax-filled ear to Chauncey's chest, showing her how to listen. Chauncey scarcely moved as the girl came toward him. He felt in a summer trance. No, even the white chick of a sister he treasured in his mind all these years made him feel like this. Beyond the girl, and around her he could see the white halo of the river. The yard was a loaded flatboat. The house, the captain's cabin, and all were floating downstream. He floated with it. He could hear the river gurgle to itself. Up in the sky, the great white clouds ran toward each other. So slowly they went, you wouldn't hear them when they met. But you could feel their meeting on ahead, and he could feel something of the girl running ahead of her on foot, running toward him, while behind it slowly walked her other self. He stood there in a kind of daze, closing his eyes a little, waiting for her to reach and touch him. Something in him cracked when the spell was broken. "Chauncey," an angry voice cried. It was Deesia, and there she was walking swiftly into the yard. Now why did she have to come back and spoil it, and what made her so mad? Her eyes flashed fire. "Let me be," he bawled at her. "You walked in here, you can walk home," she said, and dragged him for the street. Hardly had they gone halfway to the gate, when such a cry as Chauncey never heard came after. Deesia didn't even slacken. Just as she pulled him through the gate, Chauncey looked back. Something like a witch had her head out of the window. A wild mat of hair came down over her face like an animal's. "So that's who he is," she screamed. "Take that young Wheeler home and keep him there, and never let him come near my Rosa again." Chauncey looked up at Deesia in terror. "Now I hope you know better," she told him righteously. "That's one place you must never go to, and don't ever talk to that girl again. If Mama or Papa knew you were in there with Rosa Tench, you'd be whipped every night for a week and put to bed without your supper." Chapter 13. Rosa's Rainbow. Hail, sweet asylum of my infancy, children of the Abbey. If there was anybody more hard-set and stubborn than his mother, Chauncey didn't know who it was. You would think she'd be shamed to have done what she did to him when it didn't work out, but never would she give in and say so. Ever since his father had to come and fetch him home from near the fulling mill on Water Street, he was worse off than before. He had strained his sick heart trying to walk all that way home, his father said. It was true, too, because now he couldn't walk even the short pieces he used to. Oh, he'd try hard enough, take it slow, and halfway hold his breath so as not to exert himself, and still he couldn't make it. Before he'd get there, his heart would flap in his chest like a chicken with its head off. It would act worse if his mother was around. He would look at her to see if she noticed what she had done to him. Just to have her standing by with her head turned away would make something come up in him so he would almost faint. How could she be his mother and not even look at him when he tried to walk and couldn't, like her other children? Oh, if his real mother was here, it would be different. She would run to his side and bear him up with her soft, white arms. She would make him sit down and beg him not to try to walk any more, for he didn't have to. As long as she lived, she would take care of him, wait on him hand and foot. She would wash and dress him, bring his food, and read to him. With her he would have security. But all this woman, they said, was his mother, would do was turn toward him in a cruel and bitter face when she thought he wasn't looking. "Well, what do you think of your horse doctor now?" his father said to her one time they had to carry him back in the house. Not a word could she say, and yet she wouldn't give in. He couldn't walk to the barn without stopping, and yet he had to go to the boatmen's frolic. The girls daren't go. It wasn't gentle enough. His mother couldn't go because Fay expected a baby, and she promised to come at the first word. Only his father had to go, for professional reasons, he said, and now he had to take Chauncey along. It will do him good to get out, his mother said. He won't hardly have to walk a step, since you're going in boats, and the grove lays right on the river. The boy could see his father didn't want to take him. He had to make a speech, Porteous complained, and talk to a lot of people, but Sayward was obdurate. Now, recollect, Chauncey's with you, she said when they left, and young as he was, the boy knew what that meant. Chauncey's father knew it too. What refreshment I take will be strictly in the interest of the many. He deviled her for being saddled with Chauncey. The more I consume, the less there'll be to debauch others. Fowler's Grove stood north of Americus, on the far side of the river. Some days you could see its blue skyline from the cabin. From downtown, its bulk stood out darkly against the hills. It was the only woods left close to Americus, they said, that hadn't been cut down. Pigeons still nested in its hinder parts, where the ground was wet and soggy, and coon were trapped on its paths. You could get to it by the new bridge, and a long pair of wheel tracks running through stumpy meadows and standing water. Or you could go by boat clean to the grove's edge on the river bank, and that's how Chauncey and his father and most of the boatmen went today, in rowboats and pole-boats and flat boats like King Sam used to have for his ferry. It was a hot day, even on the river, but from the moment they stepped off the boat, Chauncey could feel the chill of the great trees. Here they grew in their native soil, standing in immense silence and shade like his mother had told him. All his young life had he heard tales of the big butts from her mouth and Aunt Jenny's, and from the old men and women who came to their kitchen, of the mad wolf that bit Jude McWhirter, of the panther that tried to come down Aunt Jenny's chimney, and of the blood-red beast with its hide skinned off that Resolve saw run through the trees. Oh, his mother could talk of the deep woods all day if she wanted. She hated the darkness by day and the terror by night, and by day and night the eyes of the heathen trees a-watching you. At night, Aunt Jenny said, they made themselves into savage, frightening shapes. When you tried to sleep, their long fingers tapped on your window pane. If you visited too long, they grew right up in your cabin while you were gone, and if you were foolish to go out alone, they addled your wits and turned you around so the sun rose in the west and set in the east, and never could you find your way home again. They had swallowed up his Aunt Sully, and never was she found, even to this day. But the worst was the wild thing without a name that followed you in the deep woods, and no man knew whether it was flesh or spirit. His grandfather Luckett had known it, and once his mother had felt it so close that she broke out in a cold sweat, and her legs tried to run, but never did she see what kind of thing it was. Chauncey felt glad today he was not alone, that all this end of the woods was filled with boatmen and their families. Their colored shirts and dresses brightened the shade, and their cheerful talk and cries warmed the chill. He saw Aunt Jenny and Uncle Will, the whole Quitman family, the Fices, and the Gannons, the Tenches, and the McCoons, and many more. Young ones ran and yelled and played. The only ones that stood still were he and Rosa Tench. Now why did she have to stand so alone, he wondered. He had to hug the log where his father set him, but she had no bad heart to hold her, and yet for a long time he saw how she kept away from the others. Did she have no girl-friend like Massie did, he wondered. It went through his mind that she was different from the rest, like she lived in some other world. He sat there very still, thinking this over, feeling the green light on his lids, the mysterious shadows on his skin, measuring the height of the vaulted ceiling, tasting the breath of the wild fern and the scent of the bruised ground. When he looked for her, she was gone. A good part of the day passed till he saw her again. For hour after hour he had to go out, but he didn't dare. The other boys, he noticed, just ran behind a handy tree, anxious to get back to their game. But never could he do that, stand where others could see him. Besides, with others watching, likely it wouldn't come. That's the way it was when he was little, and he had to do it in the bucket, while a stranger sat in the kitchen. As the day wore on, he grew desperate, and more desperate still, wishing for the back house at home, and peace and privacy. His father was busy, surrounded by people. He wouldn't dare to tell him what he wanted. Folks would think him a baby who didn't know he had a fly hole in his breeches. In the end, he started painfully for the Bull Laurel, where he noticed that the girls and women went. It was far, but he daren't come back without what he sought. Little by little, resting on logs and roots, he made it. When he heard strange women comin', he stumbled out quickly on the other side. That's how he found himself alone in the great woods, or he thought himself alone. His eye ran down the dim aisles till it stopped, fearing to be lost, and there coming back from the depths of the forest was Rosa. "I saw you when you first came," she said, after she got close to him. "I saw you first," he told her, for he couldn't let a girl get ahead of him. "I saw something else just now," she told him. "I'd show it to you if you didn't have to go back where the others are." "I don't have to go back," he said quickly, and took her hand like he always took his sister's or his father's hand, and they started off together. "Don't you want to be with your father?" she asked him. "He's not my real father." Her eyes widened, then flashed as if what he said had struck hidden fire. "Why isn't he?" "Because he isn't. My mother isn't my real mother either. My real mother's a lady with gold rings and white hands. She wears fine dresses and lives in a place far away from here. She and my real father only gave me out to raise. It's a secret, but someday they'll come for me, and then I'm going back." Now what made Rosa give him such a blinding and understanding look, as if he had done something wonderful for her? For a moment it seemed he could look through her eyes, down a long, illumined passageway in her mind. She made him tell her more, pressing him with questions. Only when he remembered that all this time they had been walking did he stop. Why he couldn't walk, he told himself. He got heart palpitation and flip-flops. They would shake his whole body, and he was liable to die. For a second he listened. He couldn't even hear his heart or feel it. It seemed like he didn't have a heart, or else it had stopped, and this was what it felt like to be dead. "What makes you so white just now?" Rosa asked him, and now he knew he was still alive, because that old heart came back pounding and flopping. Just for a moment Rosa paid it no attention. She held up her finger for him to be still, and helped him down stones that looked like steps, and he found himself in the strangest place. What was it like? He asked himself, looking around. Then he knew it was like a church in the woods for gnomes. The floor was sunken and flat and covered with logs like pews, while up in front one rock stood on another, like a pulpit. Green mold and moss were over everything, over floors and pews and pulpit. Even the light in this little church was green, as if it came through green glass windows. "Did you see anything just now?" Rosa whispered. "No, but I thought I did," Chauncey whispered back. He felt sure somebody or something had just left as they came. He could still feel a presence here, like he could Aunt Jenny's when they went in her house, and she wasn't at home. As they left, Rosa kept looking back over her shoulder. He could hear something behind them in the woods, and running ahead of them too. Now it came, and now it went, and now it talked to itself in the tops of the giant trees. Then it stayed quiet, listening. Not far ahead, a bush moved, but when they got there, what moved it had gone. All hung still. Rosa squeezed his hand to look. Something was there along the little run, where it came out of a leafy tunnel, and dripped over the wet stones, and into the dark little pool beyond where the yellow sand grains went round and round, as if a hand lay in there stirring them. But you couldn't see any hand, only a strange reflection in the water. Farther on, a leaf trembled when no one touched it. Now it stopped and fled, but not very far. Just ahead of them it kept so you couldn't quite ever find it, or dared look at it if you did. All you could see was the curious mark it left in the wet black ground, and what looked like a three-toed footprint worn deep in the round stone. "Shh," Rosa said when he hadn't made a sound. How small they felt, standing there, or moving hand in hand through the giant woods. Up and up rose the big butts. On and on ran the trackless reaches of the forest. All the time, whatever it was they felt still led or pursued them. Never would it let them see it, Rosa told him, and never would they know what it looked like, save from the light bellies of the leaves, from the shape of the snake, and the way the partridge vine ran over the ground. It was heathen and didn't care for human folk, Rosa said. It came only to lead them wrong, to lose them in the swamp or quicksands. It knew every step of the woods, all the beautiful hidden places they could never hope to find because they couldn't put their heads inside a tea-berry blossom or slide up and down the long colored spider threads from the tall trees. If only they could make themselves wild for a moment, then, oh then, Rosa felt sure they'd see it, for even now it lay under the dogwood. In a moment it would come out and show itself. The squirrel had seen it. They could tell by his chatter. But now it changed its mind and was drawing back again. All they could hear was something high in the tree tops, making fine sounds like tiny gold sovereigns dropped into the hanging nest of a golden robin. Oh, Chauncey never felt so close to anybody as he did today to the shy girl by his side. They understood the very thoughts of each other. Things spoke to them with the same words. What a long ways off his family and hers seemed here in the deep woods. He had to push his mind even to remember. Only Rosa was contemporary. Only she and he were real, and they were going through this wild and beautiful time together. Once in a deep, shadowy place, they stood and watched a tiny gold leaf come fluttering down, as from another world. And once they came to an old giant of a log that had caught in the split fork of its own butt when it fell. The top layer of that hollow log had cracked off long ago, and the deep bed filled up with mold, and now it looked like a monster flower box, green with fern and white with strange wood flowers. Chauncey wanted to pick some from the lower end, where he could reach, but Rosa said he daren't. It belonged to the wild thing. Once, when they got tired, they sat on a green log to rest, and felt the soft, slow rain of the deep woods falling about them. Not a wet rain, but the fine drippings from the high and ancient roof of branches, leaves, needles, twigs, and bark. If you listened sharp, you could hear it. A dry drop on a green leaf, then a drop on a dead leaf, and now a faint drop on your shoulder. Rosa wished they could sleep here and have it drizzle on them all night, and in the morning when they woke, they would find themselves covered with a light sifting of gray snow. But they went on, sinking in leaf mold to their ankles. They tramped on flecks of pale sunlight falling through the great roof, never still but moving, dancing like ghost leaves on the dark forest floor. And once, in the most deserted place of all, they heard a strange cracked voice. "Jack," it said. "Jack." "What's that?" Chauncey called out terrified. They stood holding each other and listening a while. "It's just a tree saying Jack," Rosa said at last. "You're sure it doesn't say Chauncey?" he begged. It relieved him it was just an old tree creaking in the wind, and that it said only Jack. He would not like to hear his name called by a tree in the deep woods, and never know what it wanted. As they went on, they could hear it croaking after them. Jack, Jack. The only thing Chauncey hated was to miss the pigeons' nesting ground. They had one in Fowler's Grove, Rosa said. If only they could find it. Her father had seen it, he claimed. Nesting grounds were always laid out, either round or square. This one was in a circle. You would think surveyors had done it. So round it was, you couldn't find a tree with a nest in it outside the line, and if the line passed through the tree, there were nests on one side of the tree and none on the other. Oh, that was something to see, Rosa said, especially in nesting time, when everything was blue with pigeons, all talking to each other like people. You could hear them a long ways off. "Oh, coo," they said. Rosa wished she could just see a flock feeding in the beech woods. When they came toward you, her father said, they were like a long blue sea wave, 4 or 5 feet high, rolling along the ground. That wave was boiling with pigeons flying from and back to the front. Chauncey wished he could see that blue wave boiling with pigeons, but he wouldn't like to see when you shot them. Then Rosa's father said they always fell on their red breast. Chauncey hated to see the woods come to an end. First, white sky shone through the trees, and when they came out of the woods, there was a creek and open field beyond, all in the blinding sunlight. He felt a little shaky, but he hadn't died. His heart only flopped a little. Now wasn't it strange that over here away from his mother and sisters, he could walk? It showed they weren't his real mother and sisters, and now just thinking about them, he could hear calling far away in the woods. Only these were the deep, disturbing calls of men. Rosie, a voice like a distant hound's bang, rang through the trees. "It's you-know-who. I must go," Rosa whispered. "Then I'll have to too," Chauncey told her. They stood looking at each other. The spell they had found together must soon be broken, Chauncey knew, and he held desperately to the last few minutes. They had been free as the birds. Now they must go back to separate prison houses and jailers. "Don't forget me," Rosa begged. "I could never forget," Chauncey told her. Her eyes searched his. "I'll give you something to remember me by," she promised. "Just wait, I'll show you." Swiftly she led him across stepping stones in the shallow summer creek. On the other bank she found a thin white wood slab. Smoothly she slipped off her shoes and stockings, then keeping her back toward him her dress. For a moment she stood there in her shift. Chauncey waited silent. He thought this was what she wanted to show him to remember her by, but she went into the creek, wading to the deeper part, where it almost reached her knees. "Now watch," she called back guardedly, and clapped the water with her white wood slab. "Are you watching? Do you see it? Look and tell me, can you see it?" Chauncey looked hard. He saw her shift, her bare shoulders and her thighs when she bent. But what was so wonderful about that? "The rainbow," she called back anxiously. "Can you see it?" Not till then did Chauncey know what she meant. The spray from her white wood slab flew high above her head, and so fast did she ply it that the fine drops hung constantly in the air. Behind them was the falling sun, before them the forest. Against the dark trees the drops took on the bright colors of the bow in the sky. But this wasn't like any bow he had seen before, and it wasn't in the sky. It hung right here in the creek around Rosa. She seemed to be standing in it. It played on her, bathed her. The drops, as they came down, flashed colored fire, and the reds, greens, yellows, and violets dyed her scantily clad body. Her face glistened with water and pleasure as she turned it over her shoulder. "Did you see it? Wasn't that pretty? Do you know what it means? It means we don't have to wait for a rainbow. We can make our own. Now turn your back till I come out and dress. Then we'll go so nobody sees us." The boatsmen's frolic was over. Chauncey's father smelled like a stale old whiskey cask as he took him on the flat boat back to town. The boy's blouse felt wet and cold with sweat, and his legs twitched and trembled. But a great peace and wonder was on his soul. They were pushing out into the main current, when shouts rang from boat to boat. "Here they come." Chauncey's father held him up so he could see. What looked like a long streamer of cloud was blowing up from the south. It blew very fast, and when it came to Fowler's Woods, the front of that cloud began to settle, dropping to the tops of the trees in a blue wave. Only then did Chauncey know they were pigeons. One of the men on a boat near the grove fired his gun, and the birds rose again. They came up like waiting fired in the air, swarmed together and circled around. Their graceful sweeps and dips made him dizzy with pleasure. All the time fresh flocks were arriving, and still the column came from the south, till the sky above Fowler's Woods was a great whirlpool of circling pigeons, now rising, now falling, now almost settling, and then swooping up again, with a sound like rumbling thunder under the boy's head, swam with the spectacle, and he wished he was up there with them in God's free sky, as far down the river as he could see in the failing light. He looked back at Fowler's Grove. "Oh, the woods," he whispered to himself, "the terribly beautiful deep woods." How bitter he felt toward his mother for hating it and wanting to cut it down. Chapter 14. The Summer Sweeting. Oh, yellow's forsaken, and green is forsworn, but blue is the sweetest color that's worn. Old verse. She should have caught on sooner, Sayward told herself afterward, by the way Sooth was singing around the house all the time, and still more by the bloom on her face. Why, hardly was she halfway through 16 years old, and yet she looked like a tender white peony in full flower. But then, ever since she was a little tyke, Sooth had been a master hand for singing, and all Sayward's children were well-formed and sightly, Huldah especially, though never could she match Sooth. Sayward reckoned it just excitement coming out on Sooth. They were giving a singing play in Mechanics' Hall, an operetta, the handbill called it, with music on the ancient Jewish cymbals and other instruments. Leah Morrison had got it up. The Thespians, they named themselves and their show, a play at the fair. Huldah and Sooth were both in it, but Sooth the most, and all day you heard her singing pieces from it. She didn't hold to her own pieces. Her voice was treble, and Huldah's deep alto. But that didn't keep her from singing what Huldah had to sing, too, and she didn't stop there. No, she sang what the men had to sing, the high tenors and the low tenors, the baritones and the basses. Sometimes it sounded like she started at the beginning and sang the whole play clean through. "Hush up, for God's sake," Huldah would bawl at her. "I hear that most every night. Now I have to hear it all day." Sooth's singing would shut up then. You'd think a song choked off like that would die, but it must have stayed alive, bottled up inside of her. As long as she kept holding it in, you wouldn't hear anything. But the minute she forgot, the song came out of its own self, and just about where she left off. She didn't sing too much around the house for her mother. Sayward liked singing, though not all that passed for it. Once she was invited down to the Morrisons to hear a lady singer from Cincinnati. Some must have liked it, for they clapped her over and over, but Sayward went home as soon as she decently could. She never liked screaming, not even if you had hurt yourself, and this lady hadn't. Now Sooth sang to please herself, for all she let on. Nobody else heard her. It made no difference. Was she sweeping or hanging up clothes, or taking them down, or sprinkling them? Sayward held that nothing sounded so at peace with life as a woman singing to herself while she worked. Tonight, when a man called to take sooth to practice, Sayward gave it no second thought. It would be strange if Sooth wouldn't get to know some men folks. Play practice had been going on for a long time, but that didn't mean such a man was sweet on her, or that she would have him if he was. You could never tell the way it would go with a man and a woman before marriage, and sometimes not afterward. There was Huldah and George Holcomb. Folks said the young ironmaster would surely have enough of a young girl who tried to get him by coming stark naked to his furnace house, claiming robbers left her that way. They said he'd be mighty careful after that to pick him some decent homebody to be mistress of his iron plantation. Yet all this time never had he taken a wife, but had come courting Huldah instead, and still she wouldn't have him. Huldah, your beaus are riding up the lane. Massey or Sooth would run in to tell her, but hardly would Huldah get giddy about it. No, let him come if he wanted to, she'd say, or let him stay away. Not too much notice would she take of him when he was there, save to scorn or devil him in her heavy voice, while her younger sisters sat around with bleeding eyes, that she would treat a fine and handsome lover so. Take tonight. All day Huldah knew he was coming this evening to take her to practice, that he drove 4 miles, and crossed the river to get here, and would have to do the same going back. But do you think Huldah would get her flax work done, so she could get off in time? No, all day she kept putting it off for one reason or another, for all Sayward knew, on purpose to hold them up tonight, and make him cool his heels. She was only in the last act anyway. Now she sat on the bench in the kitchen, a-carding the broken flax into rolls to spin on the big wheel. It was hot and tiring work, and when George sat down alongside and tried to help, it didn't suit her. Closer he got, and too close, for Huldah snapped like a bean. She took the candle and touched off the towel on the bench between them, and he had to jump from there in a hurry, for you can only work flax when it is powder dry. Up it went like gunpowder on Independence Day. Oh, how Deasia and Libby called out against her. She might have burned 'em and the house down besides. What's more, she burned up the towel. Sayward only smiled to herself. It was a good sign between them, she thought, and some day it would turn out all right, for never would George Holcomb give Huldah up when she was pert as she acted tonight. It was late enough when Sooth got home. Huldah still a-practicin', Sayward was ready to say, for greeting, but Sooth stood in the door too long, letting in the cold, holding back in her own ma'am's house, mighty pretty in her long wrap that had been Huldah's, her white cheeks flushed. Then she moved in, but she left the door open, and Sayward saw somebody was a-steppin' in behind her. It was Captain Byrne, that eat-frog fella who played the trumpet in the play piece. "Mamma," Sooth asked her, and her eyes sparkled like outlights. Now what did that mean? Sayward wondered. And had it anything to do with this outlander from the coast of Frenchland? She turned to look at him. He had closed the door and stood by it, very stiff, his eyes blight, his boots blacked like his hair. She had to admit he cut a figure, especially for such a thick-set feller, in his dark green overcoat with a cape. She could ready see how a young girl might think it a lark to let such a one fetch her home, especially when folks said he had been a soldier of Napoleon. He had been to Egypt and Russia with the great Bonaparte, they told. Now Porteous hardly thought him old enough for that, and if he was, why wouldn't he talk on being there? It was because his emperor was beaten and disgraced, Sooth said, standing up for him. All the blood and dying, the ruin and exile, lay too heavy on his mind. Oh, that was something to move a young girl's pity, to let him walk home with her on a cold November night, Sayward thought. But that was just as far as it should go. Is Papa home? Sooth formed with her lips. Sayward shook her head. He's not here. Sooth turned and told him with regret. Then I do your mother the honor, he said, nothing abashed, and you could hear the foreign saw, or French locust, in his tongue. He came up and gave Sayward a springy bow. Oh, you could see he had plenty of cheek, and wouldn't be taken down easy. Good evening, madame. I ask the honor of marriage with Sooth. Libby and Desia drew their breaths, but Sayward sat there like she was used to officers of the great Napoleon coming to seek her aid. Just the same, her mind ran fast enough. They must have been mighty thick with each other these nights at practice, she thought, for this to travel so quick. What did Sooth mean letting it go so far? Her eyes went to Sooth, and there they halted. There was out in Welsh Valley a family of brothers named Griffin, all bachelors. They did their own cooking, washing, thread spinning, and weaving. They even sewed up their own clothes. They had a few fields of wheat and corn for bread, cows for milk, and stands of bees for honey. In the winter, 2 of the brothers burned charcoal to send to town. The other sometimes fetched in honey and a kind of apple he called the summer sweeting. 2 or 3 times a year he would come along riding that 2-wheeled cart of his, a-blowing his long shepherd's pipe, so any who wanted could come out on the road and buy. All this year, whenever Sayward heard Sooth come in the house singing, it minded her of the shepherd's pipe, and she would say to herself, "Here comes the summer sweeting." But now she thought that never before tonight had she seen her so mortal fair, with her pure blue eyes, her fresh white skin, and light red hair. So this eat frog feller wants to take our summer sweeting, she thought, giving him a black look. Why, never would he see 30 again, and Sooth no more than 16. He must have been behind the door when good looks were given out, while Sooth ever took your breath like Jenny used to as a barefoot girl, a-running like a white head through the woods. Why, little girls, when they went by, would stop stock still to see Jenny, like some white flower that sprouted from this black ground. But Jenny had no red hair, and never had she quite come up to Sooth, who hadn't been born or even thought of then. "Mamma," Sooth reminded her. "I heard him," her mother said mildly, in her broadest woodsy accent, so that he at once would see the worst of her. "I couldn't say right off. I'd have to talk it over with your pappy first." Sooth looked at her quickly. Now what was in the back of her mother's mind that she would say that? Why, her mother had her own opinions, and would stand up for them in front of anybody. She didn't have to talk anything over with her father first, and never would she speak to one for another, as she was doing now. This must be just to put him off, and to let her know that already she stood against their wedding. Sooth was ever the one to wound easy. Her stricken glance flew to her suitor, but all he did was bow, as though her mother had spoken to him directly. "I will wait till the next practice," he said. "Good evening, madame. Good evening, young ladies." He gave 2 more. Bows stiffly from the waist up. Then Sooth went out with him for a few minutes, closing the door behind her, and you could hear her whisper. When she came in, Huldah and George were with her. "Sooth's going to be married," Libby cried before they had the door shut. Huldah's face instantly distorted and darkened. "Why, you young whippersnapper," she said. "Who to?" "Captain Burned. That cheek puffer. When?" "In December, I think, if Mamma lets us." "Why, that's next month," Huldah declared. Her eyes had strange tongues of black venom for her young sister. "How is it you can't wait? It doesn't sound decent. People will think." "Huldah," Sayward warned her sharply, "don't say anything you shouldn't, or you'll wish you hadn't." Her oldest daughter stood there, silent for a little, but you could see the forbidden words working under her pretty skin. "I thought you were cracked on a June wedding," she jeered. "December is a very nice month, Huldah," Sayward broke in calmly. "It's the month our Lord was born in." Sooth had been standing there, blanching. Now she threw her mother a blinding and grateful glance. It minded Sayward of the time Jenny had done that. Louis had said he couldn't get a missionary to wed them here in the woods, and Sayward had said, "You might boat Jenny down the river. I don't allow she would mind." Oh, that blinding look that Jenny threw her then, Sayward never could forget any more than the one Sooth gave her today. It was as much to say, "I feared you were against me, Mamma, but now I know that all the time you were on my side." Huldah's black eyes didn't miss the look. "So you think you could sneak in and get married ahead of me," she told Sooth. "Well, you're not. I was going to keep it a surprise, but now I'll tell you. George and me are getting married next week. We made it out all along, didn't we, George? Tell her, am I telling the truth or not?" She turned on the startled young ironmaster, who backed her up in every particular. But he looked much too pleased and thankful all of a sudden to have it go down with Sayward. "Oh, Huldah," Sooth stood there alive with pleasure. She ran up to her sister and kissed her. "I'm really happy for you, Huldah," she said. She wrung George's hand. "You're getting my wonderful sister," she told him, "and now you'll be my brother." Sayward could still see and hear her that evening when she made things ready for tomorrow's breakfast. Wasn't it just like Sooth to feel happier for Huldah than Huldah for herself? That was Sooth all over, blooming at night the same as by day, early in bed in the morning. Most girls looked sleepy and sulky, their skin washed out and their eyes sticky, but the minute Sooth woke up she lay there in bed like a fresh opened daisy. Now how could Sayward trust a flower like her to this short-spoken soldier? Why, he was old and hard-weighed, enough to be her pappy. Wasn't it a pity it couldn't be Sooth and George, and the rough soldier and Huldah? Then never she need worry, for George, with all his hard riding, was tender and sweet as a young boy, and Huldah could handle any great knates who had slain men for his emperor. Why couldn't likes get married sometimes? Why always had opposites to pull each other? She reckoned it some wise plan of the Lord to keep the pretty from getting prettier, and the homely homelier, the sweet sweeter, and the mean meaner. But if so, the devil had spiked that way of the Lord. Little did those opposites know, standing up before the preacher, promising to love each other till death did them part. Little did they know what they carried inside themselves against each other. They might know the other's sweetness that pulled them together, but mostly hidden yet were their own differences, that, like hand spikes between two logs, would ever try to push and worry them apart. Sayward went to the front room and undressed for bed. She felt relieved Porteous hadn't come yet. There were matters pertaining to a girl-child you couldn't easy talk over with a man, especially if that girl-child had been Sooth. Thank God she had outgrown it now, and could laugh at what once bothered her. But when she was a little tyke, never would she say her ABCs like her brothers and sisters. When she got to M, she would start hurrying a little and say MNOQR, slurring O to Q so none might notice she let out the letter P. That being a coarse word she couldn't say in public. It was something like that in church, when the preacher read some verse like the commandment, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass." Libby's face might twitch, but Sayward used to feel Sooth's little form stiffen and tighten beside her. But the pitiful thing was, the time Preacher Selin came to the house. He was a saint on earth if there ever was one. He looked like his whole face and frame were locked, and his eyes saw the glory of the Lord a-coming. Little Sooth sat on her young un's stool at his feet. When he went out after dinner, they tried to stop her, but she would tag after. Then she came a-running back, all the light gone out of her small face. "I told you he was goin' to the back house." Huldah jeered at her in the coarse voice. "Mamma," Sooth whispered, pulling at her skirt. "Is it true, Mamma? Does he have to go out just the same as we do?" Oh, Sayward reckoned the light would go out of Sooth's face a good many times when she found out all you had to do in this life, married life in particular, and how men were. The same time, what sort of ma'am would she be to try and stop her? Not always could she be here to fend for her child, to try to save it from harm and hardship. Better had it find out for itself about life at the beginning than at the end. Your bones bent easier when you were young, and your flesh sooner mended. Once you were old, the marks that life gave stayed in your flesh a long time, and a right good bump could break your bones like pipe stems. Long after Porteus came home and slept by her side, Sayward prayed that God would guide her what to say about sooth, but make it real guidance, so I can tell when it comes, she prayed. For she didn't believe in taking every stray sign and notion that came along, and claiming it the hand of God. A lost person in a woods could find twigs pointing the way home in any direction it wanted to go, and even in the Bible the devil could find plenty verses to quote for his business. No, unless the Lord spoke to her strong and plain, she would fall back on her own good sense. That sense told her that the hand of the Almighty might be a little slow, but it was more knowing than hers. Once she had reckoned to save Gordon from life by tying him close to home. All that came out of it was spilled blood, and sending him away from home for good. Oh, she would give a good deal to get this eat-frog feller alone out behind the barn, and catches him for thinking himself good enough forsooth. And yet, who was she to do that? What Woodsy had thought herself good enough for a Bay State lawyer, to make herself a wife to him and the mother of his children. No, she darsn't complain, not even on a bitter cold night. Now she better try to get a little sleep before it was time to get up. But whoever heard of a summer sweeting ripe and picked in the winter time? Wasn't it pitiful how a mother raised a girl child, tended it, loving for 15 or 16 years, and then before it was full grown, some rough-handed man came along and spoiled it. Chapter 15. Standing Water. Here I sow hemp seed I sow. Whoever wants me come after and mow. Early settler, children's game. Now that Chauncey was at school, he didn't know if he liked it or not. Some days he'd sit at his desk, blind to his book, reading the patch of window. If his heart hadn't got better, he told himself, he'd still be out there in the free air. Then if it wouldn't act up too much, he could drag around where he liked. Goods would be piled outside the stores, and the gold ball perched on the new courthouse roof. Hitching post would stand to be tagged as you went by, and things in town would pull him this way and that. The boat yards, the loading docks, and the Irish cemetery, for those who couldn't be buried with other folks. But the strongest call came from the canal, for the engineers were letting the water in for the first time today. As far as you could see, the big ditch ran, like a hill turned down and inside out. An army of Irishmen had scooped it out, cursing at the boys who threw stones at their clay pipes when they laid them up on the ground. Now they were gone, and the ditch lay new and dry. But God help the dog or cat found in it when the water came down today. They were letting it in from the river. Oh, this would be a day to remember. Folks were coming from 20 miles to see the boats, floating where had been only dry earth before. It was a high March day, with the snow already gone and the ground warm in sheltered spots. Chauncey had hoped they would let out school for the great event, but the master said they all had to come back after dinner. The master was a Yankee from Yale College, and the boys, on their way home at noon, yelled rebelliously an old round The boatmen used to jeer at the Yankee tavern keeper of the Seven Seas. He puts pine tops in his whiskey, and then he calls it gin. Some of the boys went down to the river instead of going back to school, and Chauncey tagged along. They headed for the hollow sycamore, for they daren't be seen along the canal. A holy feeling came over Chauncey as they let him in. This was the mysterious pagan temple, where men came on Sundays drinking and gambling. When the second bell rang, it sounded in here like a voice from another world, the world of the dead and imprisoned. On the academy grounds, you ran like a rabbit to get in when the second bell sounded, but here it had no more power over you than a cowbell. Between the black-burned walls of this great hollow tree, you were a free man. In fact, they were all free men now, taking turns at the corncob pipe Turkey Tench had stolen from his father. Chauncey was the last to get it. He put the hard stem, still wet from the last smoker, in his mouth. Why, it wasn't hard to smoke. All you had to do was suck at the pipe. Wasn't it strange that such powerful-tasting stuff could be soft as silk between your lips when you blew it out? He watched it float blue and delicate over his head, and fought to keep the pipe till it rattled and went out. Something tasted bitter as gall in his mouth, but he daren't spit it out in front of the bunch, so he swallowed it. Wasn't it a pity he couldn't do anything without getting sick? He told himself bitterly. It always used to be his heart. Now today it was his stomach. It must have been something he ate for dinner. The sunshine outside the tree was fading fast from the light of day, and all he could see of his companions were cloudy forms, alarmed at the croupy sounds he made in his windpipe, trying to catch his breath after puking. Waves of nausea swept over him. Oh, he had heard that this old sycamore was an evil place, and that those who came here would have a bad end, but never did he dream it would come true so quick. Why, he had just got here, you might say, and this was the first time. The boys helped him up the bank, where he found himself stumbling on a littered porch, while his stomach tried to turn inside out like an old umbrella in a storm. Suddenly, all the boys around him, except Turkey, scattered like quail, and Chauncey saw Rosa's mother, in her wild, matted hair, standing inside the doorway. He didn't want to go in, but Turkey pulled him. "Can you do something for him, Mama?" he begged her. He was smoking grape leaves, and he's throwing up all his toenails. Swaying and helpless, Chauncey saw the horrible uncombed woman come toward him. She sniffed around at his face, put him on a chair. "He's green as a gooseberry," she said, "but he doesn't smell like grape leaves to me." Sick as a dog, Chauncey watched her go to one of the joists for tea. Then the strong scent of some unknown herb filled the room. Never had the boy tasted anything so loathsome as the cup of brown liquid her claws pushed into his hands. It could be a poison for his heart, he thought as he sipped it, for she had warned him never to come near her house and Rosa again. Or it could be some witch's brew to turn him into a wolf or catamount, and then she could shoot him lawfully with the rifle that stood behind the door, and never could they put her in jail for it, or even make her bury him. No, she could skin him and use his hide for a rug on this dirty floor, and the only time his father and mother and sisters would ever see him again would be when they came to watch this witch woman wipe her feet on him. Could he have gotten out of it, he wouldn't have drank a drop, but she stood over him, and he had to swallow it to the dregs. That was to make him surely die. He knew. Already he felt sicker from the vile stuff. Often had he wondered what it was people meant when they spoke of the point of death, but now his eyes found a double crack that looked like a butcher's knife on the plastered wall, where the two lines came together for the knife's point. That, he told himself, was the point of death. Wasn't it strange how when you were dying, things came to you clearer than ever before? Here he was halfway down to the grave, and yet he could taste the strangeness of this unfamiliar house. And if it was in a cup, and he had to drink it, the tick of the curious clock, the shape of these unaccustomed rafters, the litter of disarray and dirt, the picture on the wall black with smoke and dust, so that you couldn't tell if it was a cart or a camel, the cracked and broken plates and cups on the table, the coarse pewter, and shining among them the slender shells of spoons that looked pure spun silver, tooth-marked and twisted. But the most alien thing was Rosa's mother, sitting here with him, her tangled hair falling over the soiled shoulders of her once fine dress with tassels. She was reading a book in the darkest corner, as if she had owl's or cat's eyes. Right in the middle of all this dirt and disorder, she sat at her ease, and in the middle of the day, when women still had most of their work to do, you wouldn't reckon to look at her she could read a lick, but she'd turn the old page and suck out the meaning of the new like a bird pulling out a worm. Oh, a bird looked handsome enough on the wing, and soft as a ball of down on the tree top. But once Chauncey had seen a hawk chained to its perch. Its face was fierce as a snapping turtle's, its eyes on either side of its beak a-glitter and ready for the beak to strike. That's the way Rosa's mother looked at her book, like a stooped, round-shouldered hawk in an uncleaned cage, her head and neck feathers askew and disheveled, her brown back and clipped wings smutched and smirked like the filthy old shawl she had around her shoulders. Now, why wouldn't she ever come out of this house, he wondered. All he knew was that boys talked of setting fire to the house some day, and then they said she'd have to come out, but they were too afraid of Jake Tench to try it. Once while Chauncey was sitting there, she spoke to Turkey, calling him Harold in a mild voice. Why, never did Chauncey know that Turkey had another name. To hear it said so fine astonished him. He looked to see if it could really be Turkey that his mother meant. She treated the others well enough, too. But when the door opened and Rosa came in, harsh words flew at her for staying so long. Now why did her mother feel so mean against Rosa, he wondered, for when she came in, the dark and dying world in Chauncey's head lightened. The picture on the wall turned into no cart or camel, but a dish of fruit with grapes and a ripe apple. The heavy close air sweetened, and when he saw it again, the knife cracks on the wall didn't come to the point of death at all, but ended in a round button like Turkey's nose. His own leg, that had grown numb with the sleep of death, he thought, began to waken and itch. He knew that Rosa had sat down and put her hands in her lap. Even with his head turned, he could feel her sitting still as a pin against the hostility of her mother. Once her mother leaned forward over her book. "What's your name, boy?" she put to him like she hadn't seen him before. "You mean my real name," Chauncey stammered, "or my other one?" "My real name's Ormsby." "Your real name's Wheeler," she told him sharply. "You're faithless and deceitful like your father. You think nothing of betraying hospitality and telling a lie. You can take your cap and go." "Don't go," Rosa made with her lips. "She doesn't mean it." He stayed fearfully, ready to run if she came for him. After a while she sat back. The glitter went out of her eyes. She became wrapped up in her book again. What was in that book, Chauncey wondered. The stained tassels of her dress would hang still for a moment, and then faintly quiver, or be violently shaken. He could not see her eyes. They were lowered on her book. When he could sit no longer and rose to go, she looked up, and her eyes gazed on him with some ancient bitterness as from the pit. They gave him the most unpleasant feeling. They would follow him all the way home. He'd wake up tonight, and there they would be, pitiful and accursed. Rosa had stood up too. "Where do you think you're going, Miss Rosa?" her mother asked. "I want to see that Chauncey gets home all right." "You'll stay right here, miss. He can get home by himself now, and he needn't honor us with his presence again. He was welcome only in his illness." But when Chauncey got to the fulling mill, someone called from down the side street, and it was Rosa. She must have gone out the back way and run around by the river. "I wanted to tell you I dreamed about you last night," she said when she joined him. "About me. It was such a clear dream. I was wading in the water, and the water ran uphill. When I got to the woods, a fawn came out and drank. You could see its sides go in and out, so I knew it was afraid of me. Maybe it was just running fast, and that's what made its sides go in and out." "No, it was afraid of me, and it was you," Rosa told him. "Why should I be afraid of you?" Chauncey stammered. "And how do you know it was me?" "I could tell. You know how it is in a dream. A person doesn't have to look like a person to be that person. Why are you afraid of Mama? She wouldn't hurt you. We have a picture of her painted on glass when she was young. She has on a wonderful white dress with a fine black velvet ribbon wound around her neck and down around her waist. Her complexion is so fair and smooth, and she holds her hands so you can see they are a lady's hands. They are white as milk. You wouldn't believe how beautiful she is." In his mind, Chauncey could see her as Rosa described her, young and beautiful and clean, so that men took off their hats when they met her on the street. And yet, all the time, this fresh young girl was going to be Miss Tench, who never washed or combed and wouldn't go out of her house till she died. "Why are you thinking of dying?" Rosa asked, watching him anxiously as they walked along. "Don't let's you and I ever think of dying." Now, how did she know that? He wondered. But All he said was, "You ought to take longer steps. Don't you know every step you take is one step less in your life?" She turned on him a sudden anguished face. Not another step would she take, but sat down on the log curb. "It's not true, Chauncey," she begged. "I heard it's true," he said. "Maybe that's why your mother never goes any place." "I must go back now." The girl rose and started away. "Rosa, wait," he asked her. She didn't answer, only walked the faster. "Rosa," he called. She didn't turn, and now he knew that she wasn't going to. "Goodbye, Rosa." She lifted her hand as if to wave, and then dropped it. She was almost running now, and Chauncey stood there distressed, watching her go. Suddenly he became aware that she was taking very long steps, even when she was only a speck. He could see her in his mind, taking longer and longer steps, till she was shut up in the house of that woman with the awful clouded and stagnant look in her eyes. And yet once upon a time she had been young and beautiful, Rosa said. When Chauncey reached the canal, the water was already in, and the crowds had gone home. He stopped on the bridge, staring. He hadn't dreamed canal water would be slow and muddy like this. His father said they were going to let it in from the river. He thought that, like the river, it would be bright and sparkling in the sun. Instead, it was dirty and stagnant in its bed. Did canal water ever remember, he wondered, when yesterday it had run fresh and beautiful in the river?